Welcome to another episode of Bible Stories with just a school pastor Bell. If you're enjoying the videos, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I know it's been a while since I posted one of these. Things happen. But we're going to continue right where we left off. The last story we spoke about was the story of Samuel, one of the stories of Samuel. Now today we're shifting on to Saul. And his story is a fascinating one that allows us to wrestle with some seriously big questions. I want to ask you something right from the beginning of this video. Do you think God makes mistakes? Do you think God does things on purpose? And these are very important questions for the story I'm going to present to you guys. And so we find now the children of Israel. They are living their lives as a nation, being led by God. They have no king. They have no ruler. They listen to God. And they listen to God through Samuel, who we spoke about last time. But then what happens is the Israelites start looking and comparing themselves to the nations around them. And they see all these nations, every single one of them, have a king. But they don't. And so they now think, oh, maybe we're missing something. Maybe we're doing this living thing wrong, even though they've been fine up to now without a king. And isn't that so similar to what we do? Especially if it's something we're not used to or something new to us. We start with such freedom and we're like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to try. And what happens is soon after a while, we do it a few times and then we start looking around at who else is doing this thing to try to learn from them. And then we try to do what other people are doing. And I just want to remind you, child of God, you don't have to copy anyone. And so the Israelites are looking at these other nations around them, and they notice that they don't have a king. So they go to Samuel, and they say, Samuel, we want a king. And now I want you to take a moment and try imagine yourself as Samuel. You have been leading these people for the last 30 years. And now they come to you and say, thanks for your service, but we want an upgrade. We want the new thing. We want the trending thing. It must have been heartbreaking. And so they come to Samuel, and Samuel's like, what? And we find an interesting conversation Samuel has with God, where Samuel's upset and he's throwing a little tantrum, and then God just tells him, calm down. They haven't rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me as their leader. And it's in this context, it's in this backdrop that we are introduced to Saul. And so they have to, all the children of Israel, they decide they want a king. God says, okay, you can get what you want. And there's some warnings about what a king can do. Take your children, take taxes. I mean, gee, imagine living without tax and choosing, tax is a great idea. I mean, this is the situation that's unfolding. And so they are given permission by God to replace God as the ruler I mean, God will still be God, but he's saying, okay, if you want a king, that was my thing. I mean, God the king. He's like, no, it's okay. You can replace me. We don't see leaders like that anymore. Not even in the church. Even in the church, if someone wants to get replaced, it's normally a fight and there's a split in the church and it's all madness. Here we see an example from God that when someone's taking a claim to what's rightfully his power of authority and leadership over a chosen nation, he chose. He was like, yeah, sure, it's okay. Oh, what an example. But now we're going to talk about Saul. And what happens is they select all the people. God says, nope, this tribe, nope, this family. And so they eliminate people until they finally get to Saul. And God says, that is the king. And he goes on conquest and all that. But the point I want to make here is that Saul was handpicked by God to become king. Now let's revisit that question earlier. Does God make mistakes? He chose Saul. And what we see later happening is, and this is the story, is that the Israelites are at war again and Saul is there, but then Samuel told Saul, don't go to war unless I have told you God's going to give you the victory. And so they're waiting and Samuel's not coming and Saul is freaking out. He knows this battle, it's time sensitive. And what Saul does, Saul makes a sacrifice to God. Now, in those times, that's not allowed because only the priest could. In this case, only Samuel could. And so Saul disobeys his own culture, his own custom, his own laws given by God. He disobeys them. And he repeats this action. And so God rejects him as king eventually. But did God make a mistake in ever choosing him? These are the questions the Bible brings to us. I mean, we hear from the pulpit and we hear from many popular Christian media platforms that, God doesn't make a mistake. He has a plan. But the Bible asks you to wrestle with those questions. The Bible's challenging you to say, are you sure that's what you believe? To go through doubts and to go through periods where you are just questioning God is the best thing you can do for your faith. As long as you're not running away from God, question him. Because if you believe God doesn't ever make mistakes, why did Saul fail as king? And now this is the second aspect I want to bring to you. In this story, we see God chose a king the people wanted. But even if you are God's choice, God never robs you of the choice. Now, Saul had to make choices along the way to cooperate with God selecting him as king. And in the same way, God has a plan for your life. I believe it with all my heart. But you have a responsibility to make choices to get there. God didn't program you as a robot to automatically reach your goals. No, God placed desires in your heart. And he gave you the ability to fulfill those desires. Doesn't mean it will be easy. No. But it does mean it's worthwhile. And there's a satisfaction you will reap when you're reaching that calling, that thing God placed for you. And this is what Saul missed out on. Saul could have been the greatest king the Israelites had, but he didn't cooperate with God. In his case, he had a lack of patience. What are you missing that's hindering you from reaching that calling God has for you? I really encourage you guys to continue reading your Bibles, read up on these characters, and just see God is calling you to something richer, deeper, and more meaningful. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Remember to like and share the video, and be blessed.